probably already know that most people rarely read a paper from beginning to end, right? Readers usually quickly skim the abstract, jump to the figures, and frequently go straight to the results to decide if their study is worth their time. And that means that the introduction of your paper has a much bigger job than simply giving some background information. A good introduction can change this game because it can hook the reader, make them care about the topic, create curiosity, build a logical story, and naturally lead to your research question. But many researchers turn this section into a wall of long, dense, and boring information, with too much literature and too little purpose. They obsess with the literature gap, but fail to explain why their study matters. And the problem is that when the introduction fails to capture interest, the impact of the entire paper drops with it. But the good news is that when you have a clear strategy, the introduction can be one of the easiest parts of your paper to write. So in this video, I will show you my suggestion for how to plan a clear and engaging introduction for your paper to grab people's attention, build flow, and make your paper much easier to write and read. If you're new here, my name is Jenifer. I have more than 15 years of experience working around the world as a biomedical scientist, doing research, publishing papers, supervising students, and all the academic stuff. Here at the Unfocused Advisor, I share all the best tools I discovered through my journey, as they might inspire you to have an easier and more enjoyable academic experience too. Imagine you are a reviewer. You've had a long day at work. Your inbox is overflowing with more work to do. It's late, and you still have another paper to review for a journal. For free, by the way. You grab a coffee to try to keep yourself awake. Open the document and start reading the introduction. And within seconds, you already know whether the paper will be interesting to read or painfully boring. This is the reality of scientific publishing. Your first few sentences can make or break your paper. It doesn't matter if it's a reviewer, your supervisor, or anyone else. A strong introduction should draw any reader in and make them care about your research, while a weak one loses them quickly, and it's very hard to get them back. And that is why the introduction is not just a formality. It's not just a place to dump background information before getting to the important part, especially copy-pasting some paragraphs that you had written for your thesis or project months or years ago. The introduction is where you intentionally and carefully build the case for why your study deserves attention. So how do you write an introduction that hooks your reader, flows logically, and makes your study feel necessary? Let's start with the basic structure of a great introduction. It should do three things: hook the reader, explain what we already know about the topic, and highlight what is missing, which introduces to your study as the solution. You might have heard that introduction should be like a funnel, starting as a broad topic and narrowing down to your specific study. This is a very common advice, and honestly, it can help. But many researchers misunderstand what the funnel is actually supposed to do. The purpose is not to simply go deeper into the topic without direction. The purpose is to justify why your study needs to exist. Repeat with me. The purpose of the introduction is to justify why your study needs to exist. And this is where many introductions fail. I'm sure you have seen this before. Introductions that become a long literature review, diving deeper and deeper into details without ever explaining why any of it matters. They show what is known, but fail to show what is missing. A strong introduction does not just go deep, it goes somewhere. Every paragraph should move the reader one step closer to understanding the problem, the limitation or the unanswered question that makes your study necessary. Because if your reader finishes the introduction and still doesn't understand why your work was needed, the funnel has collapsed. So after trying several approaches and collapsing my own introduction several times, I came up with a safe, basic structure that any introduction should cover. Yes, it's basic, it's simple, and it's all that you need. If you cover this basic structure, you're done. No need to complicate this. There are 4 topics that you should always cover in your introduction that, when combined, will guide your readers step by step from the big picture to your research question. Instead of sounding like disconnected blocks of information, the introduction starts to feel like a logical story that naturally leads to your study. First of all, you should have a hook. As the funnel analogy suggests, you should start by describing the big picture of the story. But here is something very important. The big picture does not mean giving the broadest possible information about the topic. It means explaining why this topic matters and why your reader should care about it. Let's say that you're writing a paper about remote work productivity. A very common mistake would be starting the introduction saying something like, work is an important part of modern society. Over the years, technology has transformed the way people communicate and perform professional activities. The internet has enabled companies to adopt flexible work arrangements, including remote work. Well, technically, none of this is wrong, but it sounds more like the beginning of a textbook chapter than the introduction of a focused research paper. The information is broad, generic, and honestly kind of obvious. The reader still doesn't know why this topic matters right now. What is the real world problem? What is at stake? Why should anyone care about this specific study? Now compare that with something like, since the rise of remote work, many companies have reported growing concerns about employee productivity, burnout, and team communication. At the same time, workers are increasingly resisting returning to office, creating tension between organizational performance and employee flexibility. See the difference? This version still starts broad, but the broadness is strategic. Instead of giving random background information, it immediately introduces a meaningful problem that people care about. It's relevant and creates curiosity. And once you establish that bigger problem, then you can move into the next part of the introduction, which is what we already know about it. What has been studied before? What is the relevant background? And this is where many introductions completely lose focus. A very common mistake is turning this section into a giant literature dump. It's like we feel pressure to prove that we've read everything. So it's very easy to spend paragraph after paragraph summarizing every corner of the field. For instance, in the remote work example I used before, they might start discussing the history of how workplace flexibility has evolved over time, differences in how industries adopt remote work, generational behavior in the workforce, the broader impact of digital transformation, and the list just keeps going. The problem is not that these topics are irrelevant individually, but that they're not strategically connected to the actual question the paper is trying to answer. The introduction becomes wide, heavy, and unfocused. The reader starts wondering, okay, but where is this going? Your goal is not to show everything that is known about the field. What you need is to provide the specific background your reader needs in order to understand the problem your study will address. So a stronger version might sound more like, previous studies have shown that remote work can improve employee flexibility and job satisfaction. However, findings regarding productivity remain inconsistent, particularly in collaborative tasks requiring frequent team interaction. While some studies suggest that digital communication tools can compensate for physical distance, others report increased delays, misalignment, and employee burnout in highly remote environments. Notice what this paragraph is doing. It is selectively presenting the information that naturally leads the reader towards a specific unresolved issue. And that's exactly what you want. Once you've established what is already known, the next logical step in any introduction is to ask, what is still unknown? In other words, where is the gap in our understanding? This is the moment where many writers feel like they are doing the right academic thing. So they zoom in on the gap itself and start saying that there is a lack of research on X, or that this topic hasn't been sufficiently explored. And the issue here is that the gap on its own is not the point. It's just a transition point. What actually matters is what the gap means. A gap only becomes meaningful when it connects directly to a problem, a limitation in the field, or an unanswered question that affects decision in the real world. Without that, it's not a reason for a study. So in our remote work example, a typical approach would be to say that despite previous studies, there is limited research on productivity in fully remote teams that use delay communication tools. This identifies a gap, but it still feels incomplete because it does not explain why we should care about it. What changes because we don't know this? So a stronger version should make that connection immediately by saying, for example, that it remains unclear whether fully remote teams relying heavily on delayed communication can maintain consistent productivity in tasks that require rapid coordination. This creates uncertainty for organizations designing remote work structures that need to balance flexibility with performance. See how now the gap becomes a meaningful problem that naturally justifies why the study needs to exist. That's what we want. And once you have that, there is only one step left in the introduction. You move from the problem to your solution. In other words, you clearly state what your study is going to do about it. This part should be simple, direct, and purposeful. The reader should immediately understand the direction of your work, so you can frame it as a name or a hypothesis. For example, in our remote work case, they could say that this study aims to investigate how reliance on delayed communication tools affects productivity in fully remote teams, especially in tasks requiring rapid coordination. With that, we simply close the logic of the introduction by showing that here is a problem and here is what we are doing to address it. Of course, you don't have to rigidly stick to this structure. In some papers, you may need to expand certain parts or adjust the flow depending on your field, your journal, or your topic. But the key idea is that if you start by planning this simple logic first, you will always have a safe and reliable way to build your introduction. One that keeps your reader oriented, engaged, and actually interested in what comes next. And if you want to go deeper into this and really master how to build strong and high impact introductions, you can find it inside my course. There, we go step by step through this basic structure and explore in detail how to turn your scattered ideas into a clear narrative that flows from the big picture to your research question. You will also learn how to strategically structure each paragraph, connect all of them in a fluid story, and how to properly use AI to help you draft your complete introductions with structure and flow. I'll leave the link below if you want to check it out. Before I give my last but not least advice regarding writing introductions, please share with us in the comments what you personally find hardest when writing an introduction. Is it starting the first paragraph, narrowing the background, explaining the gap, or maybe connecting everything together? And my last piece of advice for today is to try not to start your paper by writing the introduction first. I know it sounds natural because it's the first section in the paper, but the introduction only works well when you already know what story your results are going to tell, so that you can use the first section to intentionally guide your readers there. So instead, try starting from the core of your study, which are your results, and then building your narrative from there. Then come back to the introduction once the direction is clear. If you want to see how this connects to the bigger strategy of writing a full paper, I've made another video where I show exactly how to start from your results and build your entire manuscript in a more logical and efficient way. I'll leave the link in the description for you. And if this video helped you gain more clarity about what actually needs to be covered in the introduction of a paper and how to structure the whole section, make sure you give it your like and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss our new videos on how to write and publish your papers in an easier, more professional, and more enjoyable way. See you soon!